Hi all, Ross here, Thomas Classic and Modern. Welcome back to the channel. So here we are going to get stuck into what I'm hoping will be part 3 of our Gearbox strip and rebuild series. As I've said before, and I've said in most of my videos, we tend to shoot these videos as we are doing these things. We don't go out just doing things to make a video, if that makes sense. So apologies if it doesn't run as smoothly as usual. However, this section, all about the diff unit. So we are going to get stuck into stripping this diff unit, which is the one out of the actual gearbox that we've stripped. So here we have what the diff unit looks like itself. So here we have the diff, crown wheel, still with its bearings on. We'll strip that unit down, show you what to look for again in terms of wear, show you what we do when we reassemble them. And in this instance, this diff is getting rebuilt with the mini spares, uprated diff pin and sunwheel assembly, which has the bushed planet wheels, sun wheels, planet wheels, whatever you want to call them. So they run with a bushed, and that is the upgraded pin that goes along with those bushed planet wheels. We also have here 2 brand new RHP diff roller bearings, which we will be fitting. I have got 2 thrust washers in case we should need them. These are commonplace now for breaking up and finding them missing and all sorts. So we got 2 of those just in case. And the 2 new bronze thrusts that come for the diff cage, which come with the kit as well. Also comes with a new roll pin to knock down through the diff pin itself. So all of that is the kit. They are not included in the kit. My suggestion would be that if you are doing this at home, buy yourself 2 of these as well. They are well worth replacing. And obviously the last thing you want to do is be stuck into this and find out that you need these and you haven't got them. They don't come with a kit, unfortunately. So enough of me waffling. Let's get this thing set up in the soft jaws in the vise and we'll make a start on pulling it apart. First thing we need to do is get this bearing off. A couple of ways of doing that. These bearings I will not reuse anyway. These are the old thrust type bearings. So I won't be reusing those. We're going to pull those off. These normally come apart in 3 pieces. The outer race, the inner cage that holds the balls, in this case they're plastic, and then the inner race usually ends up staying on the crown wheel. So we use a 3-legged puller. Yep. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. All depends on how tight the inner race is on the crown wheel itself. These are really, really inexpensive to buy. You don't need massively expensive things like this for the amount of time that you use them. There are other types available. There's a sort of split bearing that goes underneath and pulls the whole lot off. I've never really had much success with those. So get that on there like that, and then you can either wind it down or I'm going to use an impact. So as is usual, it's come apart. So that's the outer race. That's the inner cage that carries the ball bearings, and you can see the inner race is left on there. Next thing we need to do is knock all of these lock tabs over out of the way so we can undo those main bolts. Okie dokes. So knock all of our lock tabs back out of the way. Job done. And in theory, this should lift off. And there we have one of the thrust washers that I mentioned earlier on. What I will do is I'll pop that to one side and we'll measure how thick that one is. This is our output shaft. I'll show you that in a little bit more detail in a sec. And obviously this is our crown wheel. I will also show you a few things to look at on that in a second as well. But for the time being, we will carry on stripping this unit. Next thing that we need to do, we need to knock this roll pin out that is just here. And that needs to be knocked out from this side, not that face. So, spin it round. Easiest way I find to do this is just place it on top of the vise, and you will see a small hole here, which is where that roll pin will knock through. It won't come back through this way. That is an access hole to knock it back out the other way. So we need suitable sized pin punch. And out it comes. And there we have the pin. That could be reused again if you wanted to. Obviously, the kit comes with a new one anyway. Right, so next thing is to get the actual diff pin itself out. So this pin that runs through here is the actual diff pin I showed you earlier on in the new kit of parts. And that needs to come back out. I knock these back out in the same direction as the hole for the roll pin. Just kind of saves, hopefully, anything getting snarled up. Now, some of these can be a bit of a problem to get out. And I will show you in a second. Hopefully, this one will come out. But I will show you in a second. I've got some worn diff pins to one side, so I can show you how these things do wear. Let's get a slightly bigger punch. So, punch on the end of the diff pin. Lovely. Absolutely brilliant. That's what we like to see. Now, that can be a battle when you've got a worn diff pin. So there we go. That diff pin now will come out, he says. What do we have in here? We have our center thrust block, our planet wheels, sun wheels, and our thrusts. And that is going to need tapping out of there. That hasn't come all the way out. There we go. And it hasn't come all the way out because it has started to wear. I'll show you that in a minute. And then the other side, our other sun wheel, our other thrust, and this is our other output shaft. And there is the thrust washer, fiber thrust washer that I said to you about previously. That is all there is to stripping a diff. Nothing rocket science about it until you run into problems. Now, hopefully you can pick this up in the video. So this is the diff pin we've just removed. So if you look at this diff pin here, yeah, you see you've got the shiny section, but there's no step or ridge. So just a little bit of wear. The other side, shiny, but we have a step. I'm not sure whether you're going to pick that up in video, but you can see the step there. That is what happens to these diff pins. They wear. So to show you what can happen, is this. So that is excessive diff pin wear. And that is one that we've taken out of a gearbox. I have about 3 or 4 of these over on the shelf of shame, over in the reception area there, which I like to keep things like this. Sad, I know, but that is what can happen. And obviously this one has started. So there is an element of wear in there. That's the reason. Again, every gearbox that we do has its diff rebuilt regardless. And every gearbox that we do has the uprated pin kit with the bushed planet wheels fitted or a cross pin diff. So there we go. So that's all apart. That's scrap. It's not bad enough to keep for my shelf of shame. So we are now into what are we looking for. We have it apart. We have it down to its component parts. So what are we looking for now when it's apart? In the first instance, what you need to look for is damage. And I haven't got one to hand, so apologies about that. But this face in here is actually where the thrust washer sits. So that thrust washer sits in there and is obviously held in place by the pin itself. Yeah. And then the planet wheel, sun wheel, whatever you want to call it, sits on top of it. Now, if that diff pin wears, those planet wheels can move back and forth in that cage. And what they can actually do, they can eat away at the cage out there and they'll make their own clearance. So as you can imagine, those gears are spinning around in there, making some lovely swarf to throw around in your engine. So that's one thing to look for with the diff cage. The other thing to look for is the bush that sits right down there in the bottom. That is where this section, this machine section of the output shaft runs. Check that for excessive clearance or tightness. I have seen these where they're tight before. Now, bearing in mind that I put that back in there without the thrust washer, yeah, that is pretty good. There's not really any play in there to decipher, which is great. So that will go again from that point of view. I want to double check what's going on with this face here and why the bearing came off so easy. But that's all fine other than that. That's clearance to check. Make sure that obviously there's no excessive movement in there. If there is, that bush down in there is replaceable, but obviously it's a machining exercise to then get the clearance correct for your relative output shaft. But from our point of view, that's all good. Other thing to check while you have this in your hand, again, yeah, check the teeth on the output shaft, make sure there's no burrs, excessive wear, anything like that on there. And check this face, make sure there's no pickup on there. This shouldn't be really, because this is a much harder material than the bush in the crown wheel. So if you've got any excessive marks or anything on this face, the likelihood is the bush is already toast. So check both of those for that. So they're all okay from my cursory inspection. So they are going to go straight over in the ultrasonic cleaning tank for cleaning with the rest of the gears. I will just show you, but it's kind of irrelevant because, again, from my point of view, if you were going this far, you're not going to reuse bits like this. But that thrust washer has got quite a bit of wear in it. You can see there's quite an inner lip almost in there. So that is starting to wear. I have seen these be non-existent, worn right the way through in excessive casings. And that one's the same. So both of those are worn. They're a sacrificial part. You should never be rebuilding a diff and reusing those anyway. If you are reusing these gears with a straightforward diff pin replacement, so you're not doing the upgraded kit, you need to pay particular attention to the inside bore of these gears. Make sure there's no scoring, wear, pickup, or anything like that in there. And you also need to do the same on this thrust face. Yeah, again, that thrust face is harder than these little bronze thrust washers. So the likelihood is if you've got really badly or non-existent thrust washers, you're going to have damage to that face because it's been running straight on the cage itself. This thrust block realistically doesn't do anything other than stop things moving around excessively. So there's nothing really to check on there for wear. Of course, check it for damage, check that all 4 prongs are on it, and just check that, you know, everything looks okay with it. You need to keep that because that needs to go back into your rebuilt diff assembly. Next, thrust washers. Again, I'm not sure whether you can pick that up in the video, but you will see that thrust washer has a very shiny section in the center and sort of 2 ridges on the outside. That is how they start to wear, and I have seen these where all you have left is that ridge there in the center, and it sits in the little groove that is left on the bottom of the input shaft, the output shaft. So that has started to wear. Yeah, that side is perfectly flat. Yeah, so that's the side that's gone up against the diff itself. So that side's been sat on the input shaft. And this one, which you might be able to see in the camera, has started to break up. So there's already a section there breaking away. And you might be able to see it, you might not. There's a very, very small crack running across that fiber washer just at the bottom there. I will measure them for fun. This one hasn't got so much of a step on the outside, so this should measure fairly easily. I'll measure it in a couple of places. So thickness wise, that is, let's say 31 thou. And a new one is 40. Okay, so I think that's enough of dismantling, inspecting, showing you what's what and where's where and what we look for. I think now it's time to start putting this thing back together. So as per the manual, the fitting is the reverse procedure of removal. So thanks very much for watching, and we'll let you box on from there. Only joking. So here we go. This is now, let's get involved in putting this thing back together with some new bits. We've got all our relevant diff pin parts here. If you can lay your hands on one, an empty old diff cage is ideal if you're going to do any voluminous work. You haven't got to, just kind of helps to hold the diff in situ. So first thing you're going to need to do, so we've got our output shafts, yeah, and our new fiber thrust washers. Drop one of those down through where it goes. Pop that in there for safekeeping. Let's get our new diff pin, and the first thing we need to do is to make sure that it fits through the diff cage itself. We'll put a little bit of lube on there. And it doesn't. That's a good start. That's why we like to do these things as we are doing them, not rehearsed or anything like that. We do them on the fly, so to speak, because these are the problems that you can come across. So that won't fit in there. Not happy with that. There is a reasonable chamfer on both ends of that diff pin, so it's not anything to do with that. So what I will do is I'm just going to get some emery cloth or some fine sort of abrasive, and I'm just going to rub it around on the inside of that hole, make sure there's no burrs or anything in there. Right, little bit of fettling further. So same thing, a little bit of wet and dry, just running around in the bores of there. Took a little bit of time, this one, to get it to fit nicely. As I say, just how these things are. So there we go. Right, diff pin now fits. Where was I? Who am I? What am I doing? I know. Right, okay, back to where we were. Fiber washer onto output shaft. Drop it in, out of the way. Diff pin. You have to bear in mind that you need to line that notch up with the roll pin hole as it goes in. So what I like to do is just put it in that position to begin with, because you have no real means of twisting this. It's a solid pin, okay? So next thing that we need in, put a little bit of oil on there. A little bit of oil on those. So I then drop in our thrust washer, and as you can see, it's got a little locating tab that sits in the diff cage. Yeah. Point to note, not that it's irrelevant for this one, the early diff cages didn't have those notches and had a one-piece, a slightly different thrust washer without that tag on. If you've got the opportunity, I would always suggest fitting the one with the tag. Stops the thrust washers picking up and spinning, which again wears out planet gears, diff cases, and all that sort of thing. So drop in your sun washer. So drop in your thrust washer. Been a long day. And thrust washer. And then we need to put in our diff pin. Pop your diff pin through. Make sure you're lined up with the hole in the sun washer. Like that. That'll hold that then in place. You then need to put in your other sun wheel and thrust washer, and the block all needs to go in as a bit of an assembly. This, so sun washer, sun wheel, and washer. Like that. And then your thrust block. You will probably find on your thrust block, you will have a couple of witness marks. Yeah. Opposite each other. Those witness marks are where that little section of that output shaft has been rubbing. So I always like to put them in exactly as they came out. Then feed your diff pin through. This is where it takes a little bit of jiggery pokery, because you need to make sure that things are lined up in here, because you've got to get that through 3 holes. Something like a punch, just to push down in there and make sure that everything is sat where it should be, and push it home. Now, it's going to be difficult to pick this up on video, but you need to push this home enough so that down through that hole, you can actually see the little groove that is in the pin. So down through that hole, you should be able to see that little notch. Yeah, and it should be in the parallel position. So that pin is in there just like that. And that is the gap that you're going to need to tap your new roll pin into. And that is as straightforward as can be. And I like to get a punch and just sink it just below the surface, just to stop the crown wheel when it goes back on there sitting off there. Well, that is that half of the diff assembled, and that is what you will hear, the clockworky noise of a differential. But you just need to make sure that it does turn nice and easy. Shouldn't be any binding or anything like that. If you've got binding there, two things to watch, which I've seen commonly done. One, you've either got the wrong size fiber washer in there, or two, you've got remnants of the original fiber washer left in that little void there. So if you imagine that when they wear through and they break and they just leave a little ring there, if you don't take the time to clean these things up and check that there's no remnants left on there, you can put a new fiber washer over the remnants of an old one. It'll take all your clearance out, and if left, obviously, it'll wear things out. So that's what you're looking for. Nice, easy spin. There we are. Well, that is that little bit of the assembly done. Next thing that needs to go back on is our crown wheel. That slots in, yeah, just like so. Line up the bolts, and what we are going to do in this instance we are going to fit some nice new lock tabs from our good friends at Smithy's Bits. He makes these, cracking job. I've removed quite a section of video from here, and in a minute you'll find out why. There we go. Again, soft jaws in the vise. You will need to do this up fairly tight in your vise because the torque on these bolts is quite hefty. Move the camera lady because I'm right-handed. But what I like to do with these is just snug them up to 60 Newton meters. In a varying fashion. So that's 60 Newton meters. So I do them to 60 Newton meters and then torque them fully. Right. See, this is what happens when you've had a long day. You're trying to think about what you're doing too much. You're trying to think about what you're saying too much, and you're filming it. Can somebody please, I look forward to comments on this, and I am going to leave this in the video. Can somebody show me what I've done? Not going to get much drive to the wheels without that in there, are we? I'll do a quick bippity boppity boop.
Rewind.
And I'll do that again. You don't need to film this bit. It's embarrassing enough as it is. Right, so forgive my faux pas there. Let me show you how it should be done, okay? Right, your second input shaft, new fibre washer. You then need to drop that in there. Then add your crown wheel and line up your bolt holes, and then put the bolts in. So, this is where we were a few minutes ago. I should have, thinking about it, I should have just let the video roll and completed it, gone all the way through, torqued it up, knocked all the lock tabs over, popped the diff bearings on and everything else, and just ended the video. Because I bet the comments would have been hilarious. Right. Okay. Now we'll pop crown wheel back in the vise, do that up, and back to where we were. So I go round and torque these up in an opposites fashion. To 60 Newton meters, which sets everything, if you like. One, two, three, 4, 5, and 6. This is the point you need to check you've got that noise and everything is turning with no binding. And then we can go to the full torque on these, which is 83 Newton meters, 60 pound-foot. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Done and torqued. Wind your torque wrench off. Double check. You've still got turning. That bit's all good. I shall now go round and knock the lock tabs over. There we go. Lock tabs knocked over. Last thing to do that I am going to do, and I know this diff is all then complete, is I'm going to knock the new bearings on. Not sure actually whether I mentioned it in the video. I may not have. So apologies if I did omit that, but it's just come to mind. I actually have measured this diff cage, and it's perfectly on size. I've measured our new bearings, and they're going to give us about 2 or 3 thou interference fit, which is fine. The old thrust type bearing that I took off there actually was exactly the same size as that shaft. There's no damage or anything to this journal here, this journal face, so that's all good. So to get these bearings on, you should be able to get them just to sit. Probably won't get that back on now, sorry. Back off. There's a chamfer that leads the bearing on, and you should just be able to get them to sit, to start and hold itself straight. And then it's just a case of tapping them on, brass drift, and walk them on, just like you would any other bearing. Until they're all the way down. And hopefully this one should be the same. Normally a bit tighter crown wheel side. What I am going to do with this one, which I have had to do before, I've got a little bit of tube that's the same size as that, which is sometimes a bit easier to hold to start them with. You can use a socket or something like that. Job done. There we go. Job done. That was an epic battle, I must admit. But I hope you enjoyed that video as much as I loathed making it. No, in all seriousness, that's just how some of these things go. But yeah, that's all done now. So that's the Diff unit built. Thanks very much for watching. Hope the series is working out. Entertaining, if nothing else at the moment. But that's done. We are now going to get on with the next part of the video, which will be building up the main gear cluster. So that will be the next part. We'll probably encompass in that refitting the selectors and refitting the belt crank mechanism into the casing. So there we go. That's the plans for the future. I'm going to grab a much needed cup of coffee. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you soon.